Recently, I've been trying to get some of these simple and cheap kits out of the stash so I can replace them with more interesting subjects. So today I'm going to be getting one of these out of the stash and onto my shelf, and it is the Airfix North American P-51D Mustang in 1/72nd scale. I'm Matt, this is Model Minute, and join me on the workbench as I build and review this kit. So despite the fact I've actually built this tooling a number of times over the years, I've never really done an unboxing, probably because it's such a popular and common kit. Inside the well-illustrated box, however, you can expect to find a set of instructions which are easy to follow, a moderately sized sheet of cartograph decals which are printed to a very high quality, 2 grey plastic sprues, which feature a good mould quality and a good level of detail. However, this tooling has been used quite a bit, so there is starting to see some flash creeping in. There is also a small clear sprue with the cockpit canopy. The painting instructions are featured on the rear of the box. I'll pop a list of the products I used during this build on the screen now to give you an idea of the kind of things you might want to go and get if you fancy having a go at this one for yourself. But starting the build, as usual, I'll cut the parts away from the sprue using my snips, and then sand down any flash or rough areas with a sanding stick. Tamiya Extra Thin Cement will be my glue of choice for this particular build. I like the fact it comes with an applicator brush in the lid, which makes the glue really easy to place, and the cement can run into gaps due to capillary action. The first step was to assemble the various cockpit details. This included the control panel, control column, and seat for the pilot. Underneath this assembly there is also a radiator, which needs to be glued on the bottom. I'm kind of going away from the instructions here, as I want to paint some things in different orders. So here I am gluing together the upper and lower wing surfaces. And then, speaking of painting, I moved over to my spray booth. Here I'm using SMS British Interior Green. This is simply being passed through my Galeri GHAC 98 airbrush. No primer or anything was used on this paint, as I find the lacquer paints have quite good adhesion to the plastic surface anyway. I'd use this paint colour on the internal areas of the cockpit, the landing gear bays, the bay doors, and the cockpit assembly. Just for reference, I'll put information up about the actual airbrush I've been using on the screen here, along with paint thinning ratios and the air pressure. I have been fortunate enough to receive this as a free sample for the purpose of review, but all opinions on this particular airbrush do remain my own. If, however, you'd like to purchase any Gallery airbrushes, I've been able to negotiate a discount code for you. So take a look at the information in the description if you'd like to take advantage of that offer. With those areas now painted and dry, I used some Vallejo black to pick out the various cockpit details, including the control panel and some smaller controls on the inside of the fuselage. The backrest of the seat was painted with Vallejo English uniform. I am going to use some Humbrol decal fix to help stick one of the transfers on the inside of the cockpit. A transfer is included for the control panel. So having cut this from the sheet, soaked it in warm water and allowed it to release, it was then carefully slid into place with the aid of the decal fix, helping it stick onto the surface. Once that was done, I then glued the clear part into place, which is the reflector gun sight, the lower portion being painted black. And with that done, it was time to install the cockpit assembly into one side of the fuselage. And then, after ensuring that assembly was square and level, I then added the other side of the fuselage, taking care to ensure that everything was flush and aligned correctly. I would run along the seams of the join between the two fuselage halves with a sanding stick just to smooth them out and hide it, by making it look a little neater. On the nose, a small part of the air intake needs to be glued in place. And then I carefully join together the wings onto the fuselage. This kit is designed quite well and most things do fit without any real issues. Another part for the air intake on the lower side of the aircraft needs to be glued into place here. You do get the option to display the flaps in a lowered or raised position, so I'm going to go for the lowered option in this particular build. You can also display the radiator exhaust vent in an open or closed position. I'm simply going to use mine in the open position. The horizontal tail surfaces were then glued into their slots at the back of the aircraft, but not the rudder because I need to paint that separately. A small component for the pitot tube is glued into place on the lower side of the aircraft wing, and then I tried to glue into place the aerial mast. As mentioned earlier, this kit has been used a number of times now, so the tooling is a little bit tired. One of the known issues with this kit is that Airfix tried to go for a scale accuracy on a number of the parts, which has resulted in them being overly thin. The aerial mast is one of these, and removing it from the sprue without breaking it is quite difficult. Not to mention that it does suffer from flash, which again makes cleaning it up very hard. I thought mine looked pretty terrible, so I just replaced it with a piece of stretched sprue, which was the correct height. The propeller assembly was then completed by gluing the prop into the retaining part at the back and then the spinner on top. Having already painted the internal landing gear bays, I decided that I would use a little bit of sticky tack to hold the gear bay doors in place and use them as paint masks. I masked up the clear canopy parts using my normal method, which is to apply some tape, press it down against the frames on the canopy, and then with a sharp knife cut the tape to size. Once I'd done this, some Humbrol clear fix was carefully applied to the clear parts, and in the case of the rear part of the canopy, it was joined to this other plastic part. Whilst the windscreen of the aircraft could be glued straight into place on the model. If you really wanted, you could glue your canopy in an open position, but I've decided to glue mine closed. And now it's time to prime. I'm using some Tamiya fine surface primer in white, but I'm only really focused on getting this onto the rudder, the nose of the aircraft, and the propeller assembly, because these need to be painted some slightly more vibrant colours. When that paint was dry, the rudder was airbrushed with Vallejo red, whilst the nose of the aircraft and the spinner were airbrushed with Vallejo French blue. I'll focus on the propeller assembly now, and the propeller blades were carefully painted by hand with some Vallejo black. When that was dry, I gave these propeller blades a coat of clear gloss varnish from Humbrol. This varnish should dry nice and smooth in preparation for the decals. And the propeller assembly needs to have these decals applied to the blades. Once that was done, I put it to one side and focused on the nose of the aircraft, which I've already masked up to protect the areas that are going to be remaining blue. And now it's time to give this aircraft a black gloss spray coat. This is just a generic black gloss spray paint I found in a home hardware shop. It may not be the best quality out there, but it does seem to do the job. Thanks to the support of my Model Club members, I've been able to purchase a new paint. This is a Tamiya LP11 Silver, which is a lacquer paint. A massive thanks to my Model Club members who are on screen now. And if you'd like to join these people on screen and find out what becoming a member of the Model Club means, take a look at the links in the description. I did thin down this Tamiya Silver lacquer with some SMS thinners, just to reduce its consistency and help it flow through the airbrush a little more. I then airbrushed this onto pretty much everything that has yet to be painted. This includes the landing gear legs, engine exhausts, and the entirety of the aircraft. That black gloss undercoat should help bring out the shine of the silver, but I'm also not going to apply it too heavily. I applied it much more heavily in another build, which in particular the Hella F84G, and I wasn't 100% happy with those results, so here I'm applying it a little bit more thinly to see if I can get a better finish. Once that had been completed and was dry, the masking tape was removed from the nose of the aircraft. The rudder was then glued into place, and you can see that I've picked out a small part of aluminium on the trim tab on the rudder. I then gave the entire aircraft and propeller assembly a coat of satin varnish. This is in preparation for more transfers. The transfer sheet was cut into more manageable sections, and then the transfers were placed in warm water to allow them to release from the backing paper. Microscale, Microset and Sol will be my decal solutions for this particular build, and the Microset from the blue bottle is first up. This is brushed onto the aircraft where the transfers are going to go. The transfers are then slid into place, and this setting solution should help soften them into the surface details. Once that is done, some Microsol from the red bottle can also be brushed on the top to further soften the transfers and make them appear painted on. I generally don't have much problem applying cartograph transfers, and these are no exception. They apply to the model really well, and thanks to that satin varnish I've already applied to the aircraft, I didn't experience any silvering once they'd been applied. Some of the transfers though were a little fiddly, and I had to take my time to get them in the right places. Once that was done and the transfers had cured, it was time to give them another clear coat. I used the same satin varnish from before, and this should help protect the transfers from any handling or further work I may do on the model. Now though, it's time to remove the landing gear doors, which seem to have done a really good job of acting as painting masks, plus they got painted at the same time. A small landing light is glued into place in the bottom of one of the gear bays, and the wheels, which I've already painted Vallejo black, were then given a coat of Vallejo silver on their hubs. The wheels could then be glued onto the landing gear legs. As mentioned previously, the landing gear legs are another area of the kit which are a little too thin. If you're not careful with the assembly, I've experienced it before in my other P-51 builds that they will end up collapsing over time. To try and prevent this from happening this time, when I glued the landing gear doors to the landing gear legs, I'd also glue them onto the wheels, which I'm hoping should help support the structure and prevent it from collapsing. The bay doors on the tail of the aircraft could then be glued in place, and this was followed by installing the tail wheel. The landing gear doors on the main landing gear bays were glued into place, and the landing gear leg assemblies were glued into their relevant holes. The engine exhausts were given a coat of gunmetal, and so too were the panels around the engine exhausts, as indicated in the painting instructions. The tips of the propeller blade were given a coat of yellow paint from Vallejo, just to let everyone know where the dangerous spinny bits are. Now that the engine exhausts are dry, they were glued into place on the nose of the aircraft. It was at this point I carefully peeled back the masking tape from the canopy and glued the propeller onto the nose. And with that, I'm calling my build of the P-51D Mustang in 1/72 scale complete. I think there's probably a few things worth mentioning about this kit. You do get a pilot included in the kit, however I've not included mine in this build. I've popped him in my spares box for potential other projects in the future. You can display the aircraft with its landing gear raised if you want to, and there are also drop tanks included in the kit which can be installed if you want to use them. I've done an aircraft with drop tanks before, so I thought I'd do mine this time in a clean version. Whilst I glued my propeller into the nose at the end of the build, it won't be able to rotate anymore. The instructions indicate that you can place the propeller into the aircraft much earlier on when you assemble the fuselage if you follow the instructions and have it be able to spin, but because of my way of painting this particular kit, I didn't think that was feasible. But having a static prop on this model is acceptable to me. Areas of this kit I wasn't entirely happy with were those smaller fine details, in particular the aerial mast, which I found snapped when I was removing it from the sprue and just looked pretty horrendous. I ended up making my own replacement from stretched sprue for that. Also, as mentioned, those very fine landing gear legs over time can collapse, as it's something I've experienced before from other kits. I think though this time, having glued the landing gear wheels and legs to the doors, which are also on the legs, has reinforced it somewhat, and hopefully I won't experience the same problem. I could have gone much further with this build, adding engine exhausts, gun smoke, chipping around the painted areas, washes and the like, but to be honest I'm quite happy with the way it looks now. The way I applied the silver lacquer paint has resulted in a slightly uneven finish in places, but it almost gives the impression of different panels being made out of slightly different variants of aluminium, or maybe being a little worn. Additionally, I didn't see the need to use a panel line wash, as the panels seem to be quite visible as it is. I'd probably consider this one to be a out of the box type build. So let's talk a little bit about the kit then. So this features 53 parts, which as mentioned are moulded to a reasonably good quality, but there is some flash and some of those parts are just too thin to really be usable. The tooling date of this model is from 2012, so it is probably one of the older kits now in the new Airfix range, so to speak. I do know that Airfix have recently tooled a new starter set version of a P-51D Mustang, so hopefully they address the issues that this kit features. However, that being said, this kit isn't particularly bad, and I think it gives a pretty good representation of a P-51. The particular version I have here was produced in 2017, which is around the time I think I actually purchased this one, and it's been sitting in my stash ever since. And I think that's represented by the price. So the price I paid for this one was £6.99 back in 2017 or 2018. However, prices now have increased slightly, so you'd be expecting to pay maybe £8.99 or £9.99 for a kit like this now. So I've just been checking my journal, and this is a book I've written myself, and I use it to help me keep my notes as I go through my builds. You can get them on Amazon if you take a look at the links in the description. And they help support the channel. But looking in here, it says that I started this one and finished it within 2 days. So this was a 2-day build. I think probably the lacquer paints being fast drying really helped with that. On the whole, I had quite a lot of fun getting that one out of the stash, and I hope to be able to do some more out of the box builds of these more simple kits to get them out of the stash so I can get other things in there. But as always, let me know down in the comments, what do you think of my build? And have you got any suggestions for other kits that I could build in the future? Once again, big thanks to my Model Club members, but if you'd like to help support the channel in other ways, again, there is full information underneath the video. Alternatively, the best way to support this channel for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on, so you never miss a modelling upload. Last thing to say though is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time. So today I'm going to be doing one of these. So one of the taking care. Once that is done, some micro sol from the red bottle and that can be finished.